Welcome to Stayf Draws. I'm Stayf van der Groot, the Dutch illustrator and animator. And in this tutorial I'm going to explain how to draw shadows. I got a question from Maximum Effects asking how can you draw something in 3D? And I think you mean how can you draw something realistic? If you want to draw something realistic, you always have to keep the light in mind. Where does the light come from? In this video, the light comes from the right. It's my left side, but it's your right side. And everything that's more to the left is darker. To explain this in more detail, I'm going to use some basic shapes, like the cube and a ping pong ball, which is more of a round form. I'm going to take pictures of both these shapes and I'm going to use different lighting. The only thing you need for this tutorial is a pencil and a piece of paper. Let's start drawing. To draw objects in 3D or make them look more realistic, you need shadows. On the left upper corner you see a picture of the cube and a little ball. I'm first going to draw the outlines on paper. The light in this picture comes from the left upper side. It shines on the front of the cube and ball. When the light comes from the left, everything to the right is darker and has a shadow. So on the right side of the cube and ball, there is a cast shadow created by the objects. I draw in the cast shadow on the right side of the cube. Notice that the cast shadow also falls behind the cube. This is because the light source comes from the front. The cast shadow of the circle has a different shape, because it's a round form. The shadow falls on the right side of the ball, because the light source comes from the left. The cast shadow looks like an ellipse. An ellipse is a circle in perspective. If you want to learn how to draw an ellipse, check out my video about drawing an ellipse. I'm now going to sketch in the shadows with a softer pencil. It's a 2B lead pencil. With softer pencils, it's easier to make shades. The front of the two objects are very bright, because the light shines on it and comes from here. The front side of the cube is very bright, so we're not going to shade it. But the right side of the cube is much darker. So sketch in the shadow on that side. I draw the shades vertical and then from right to left. In this way you get a more solid shadow. On top of the cube, the side is also slightly darker, because the light comes from the front. I draw in the shadow very lightly. These shadows are also called form shadows. So the shadows that are on the object are called form shadows. The cast shadow has the strongest shadow where the object and the floor meet. Draw in the shadow and notice that the shadow fades away on the back. On the front, the cast shadow is also a little lighter than the rest of the shadow. The cast shadow is strongest where the object meets the floor and fades out the more you get away from the object. If you want to make the shadow softer, just use your finger and smudge it. A circle has a different form shadow, because it has a round form. If you want to shade a round form, it will be more subtle. Shade it in a round form. You see that the shadow is darker on the right side of the ball and fades toward the left side. Make the shadow softer by smudging it with your finger. Now I draw the cast shadow. Where the ball meets the floor, the shadow is the strongest. The next picture has two light sources, one ambient light and a spotlight. As you see in the picture, the object has two cast shadows. One cast shadow that is lighter than the other. I will first draw the cube. The light comes from above. This is the ambient light, and the other stronger light comes from the middle. This is the spotlight. Sketch in the shadow on the right side of the cube. This is similar to the form shadow we have drawn on the first cube. The cast shadow has a different angle. We first draw the shadow of the ambient light. Draw the cast shadow very lightly. Then we draw the cast shadow that comes from the spotlight. This cast shadow is much stronger and smaller, because the light source is closer. The front of the cube has a bit of a shade as well, so sketch in the shade lightly. The top of the cube also has a faint shape shadow. Smudge it with your finger to achieve a more subtle shadow. Now I draw the ball, and the two shadows are more clear by drawing the cast shadows. First I draw the cast shadow of the spotlight. This shadow is the strongest. The cast shadow of the ambient light is much softer. Draw in the shadow very softly. The form shadow on the ball is darker than the first ball we have drawn. Draw in the shade by following the round form of the ball. It will get lighter when you draw it to the left. If you watch closely, the form shadow on the bottom of the ball is a little lighter. This is caused by the reflection of the light that bounces up from the floor. The third picture has a different light source. It comes from the back and is very low. The light shines through the paper cube. The cast shadows are much longer. In real life you see these kind of shadows by the end of the day, when the sun sets. You will get longer shadows. First we're going to draw the cube, and you already see where the light is coming from. The light is very low. The shape shadow of the right side is a little bit darker, but because the light shines through it, it's just a faint shadow. The cast shadow is very long because the light source is very low. The shadow is cast from the top side of the cube onto the floor. The top of the cube has a faint shadow. With the ball, something interesting happens. With the shape shadow. The shadow is really intense. The shadow is darkest on the middle of the ball. This is because the core shadow is cast by the round form. cast shadow is the strongest, because the ball is casting the shadow on the floor. The more you move to the right, the more the shadow will fade. When you look at the shape shadow of the rest of the ball, it is lighter. This is because of the reflection of the light from the floor. These are just samples of a flat cube and a flat ball, but you can apply shadows to all kinds of objects with a diversity of shapes and structure. If the ball were a concrete ball, for instance, it will look rather different. To achieve lighting and shadows in a concrete ball, you start by drawing the structure of concrete. The light comes from the left, so everything to the right will be darker. Sketch in the same structure of the ball and sketch it in darker the more you get to the right. Always keep the light in mind. It comes from the left. Basically, you're drawing a gradient with the structure from the concrete. Where the ball touches the floor, the cast shadow will be darkest. Maximum effects. I hope I've answered your questions about drawing things in 3D. In this way you can make objects look like they're drawn in 3D or look more realistic. This is the basic principle which you can apply to all the things you draw. Where does the light come from? And where do you draw the shadows? I hope you liked this video. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up or leave a comment. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. In that way you won't miss a single video. If you have any questions about this tutorial or questions about drawing in general, please leave them in the comments. I will read all the questions and maybe I can make a new video about it. Drawing is fun and practice makes perfect. See you next time. Doodles! With red, you get purple. If you mix all the primary colors, so if you mix yellow, blue and red, you get brown.